Welcome to Incredible Idaho. I'm Wayne Walker. Our first story takes us to the Owyhee Desert, a place often regarded as harsh, barren, and colorless. But tonight we invite you to look at this area in the southwest corner of Idaho with new eyes and discover a fragile world of delicate beauty and intricate pattern. Look at the desert through the eyes of nature photographer Bill Mullins and you'll see the essence of the Owyhees. In this case, a beautiful slender bloom, delicately colored and surrounded by the muted tones of the desert landscape.
And it's just a really incredible place. It's a photographer's dream, and it's kind of undiscovered, which is nice.
No, kind of all blooms at the same time.
Seen through the eyes of botanist Ann DeBolt, the same bloom becomes a reassurance that despite the pressures man has put on this fragile environment, native plants like this have managed to survive.
One feature that this has, it's a little bit hard to see on this one, but why it's called beard tongue is it will have these little hairs. They have value just because they were here before we were, and so just by their very nature of being, we should want to protect them and allow them to continue to survive and exist on the planet.
Flowers in this little wash here.
Some say that it's an acquired taste, this passion for the austere lines of desert landscape. But once you discover the life hidden beneath the heat waves, you may find yourself craving the quiet and beauty of this Spartan environment. Look carefully. The animal life tends to blend in with the habitat, borrowing color from the desert's muted palette. But the wildflowers are bold and showy, blooming only briefly, but defiantly, colored in the bright hues of a summer garden.
I think one of the neat things about the desert wildflowers is so many different kinds, and they grow in some really harsh habitats.
Bill's career as a wildlife biologist introduced him to the magic of the Owyhee Desert. But the unusual landscape and distinctive plant life fed his passion for photography. An evening primrose has caught his eye, one of a large variety of primroses that blooms in the desert.
There's a couple different ways to use natural lighting out here. In this case, I have the sun on my back and I'm shading the flower, and so the light's real even. And then when I move over, the light becomes a lot harsher, but you also get a lot of texture in the petals and the parts of the flower.
Bill says he uses a technique called bracketing, shooting several different exposures. Some may be too dark, some too light, but there should be some shots that are right on.
A lot of wildflower photography, you have to kind of use a lot of patience too, because when the wind's blowing, you have to sit around and wait for it to calm down a little bit.
The evening primrose is a fairly common plant native to the Owyhee Desert, but many of the desert's native plants have been crowded out by non-native plants like cheatgrass. Cattle grazing, fire, off-road vehicles, and general habitat loss have also contributed to the decline of some of Idaho's native plant species. And DeBolt's job is to survey the desert and document where some of these increasingly rare plants can still be found.
So this is Mulford's milkvetch, or Astragalus mulfordii.
Is that like as big as they get?
They can get, up to this tall, but out here in the Owyhee front, they seem to be smaller. Here's another one. It's a little bit bigger. So they have a huge taproot, so I think that's how they can survive in this harsh environment.
The roots of this plant are probably 5 feet long, reaching deep down into the arid earth to seek moisture. Now you can see tiny flowers and a pea-like fruit, but by midsummer this plant will dry up and become dormant, waiting out the harsh weather until it's awakened next spring by the soft desert rains. Some of the desert plant life is easily distinguishable, like the striking red Indian paintbrush, a partially parasitic plant. Here it entwines around a purple sage, tapping into its roots and poaching nutrients from the larger bush. But some plant life out here is more subtle. High up on this sandstone bluff, Ann has inventoried a rare species that most of us would easily overlook, perhaps not even recognizing it as a plant.
Here's our little cowpie buckwheat.
It's starting to bloom, or?
Yeah, Yeah, it blooms late June and into July. So
The plant requires the calcium-rich limestone soil that covers the top of this bluff to survive. Its pale yellow flowers are a soft contrast to the deep russet tones of the lichen that also seem to prefer this limestone soil. A bright golden blossom called the princess plume attracts a bee. Another bee works diligently along the lavender blooms of a purple sage, spreading the pollen that fertilizes the bush. The scientific names of these colorful plants are almost as beautiful as the plants themselves, rolling off the tongue like Latin poetry.
we've looked at Penstemon speciosus and Astragalus lentiginosus and this Townsendia florifer and Stanleya pinnata.
And the rich colors are a photographer's dream.
You don't find them just everywhere. You have to look for them or know where to look for them. And that's part of what makes it fun. You go out here and it's kind of like a treasure hunt, and all of a sudden you come across this trove of gems out here in the desert.
Bill has recorded many of the desert's gems on film. He says it helps to spend a little bit of time thinking about the shot and what you're trying to convey.
And
These photographs of a hedgehog cactus show various ways of looking at a single plant.
The first one is a close-up, and you see that you're just kind of, with a macro lens, getting right down on top of the flower. You have a real pretty waxy petal and real pretty color. And the second shot's kind of backing away where you see the cactus more in its habitat, which again is that real sort of harsh, rocky soil. Third shot here is another hedgehog shot, but it also shows it in association with some of the other plants that grow along with it, in this case dwarf monkey flower. That one.
This one Bill calls a lizard's eye view of the same plant. He does a similar sequence with another desert gem, the longleaf phlox. His photos range from a large cluster to a group of 3 blossoms to a single bloom covered with a luster of tiny dewdrops. Bright sunlight and wind can make desert photography challenging, but Bill says you can be inventive with both.
A lot of people tend to think that your light has to be over your shoulder when you're taking a picture, and actually shooting right into the sun, especially at sunrise or sunset, can be real effective.
These shots of a sunflower were taken with a 400 millimeter lens. It has to be wide open to get the softened effect. Shooting into the sun also adds a golden glow to this phlox.
But sometimes you can kind of do creative things with wind, and here's an example of a time exposure of about 2 seconds that's taken on some lupin. And the first shot is your lupin without wind, and the second one is your lupin on wind. And you get kind of a nice, almost a watercolor effect of the plants moving and sort of painting an image on the film.
He suggests pulling other elements into your shots. The diagonal line formed by the branch makes this photograph of an Indian paintbrush more interesting. Close-ups of lichen fashion almost an abstract pattern on the rock. In the desert, it seems the closer you look, the more you see.
There's a beautiful leopard lizard over here. Real pretty orange splotches on the side. They're usually pretty wary. I don't know if I can get very close or not, but I'm going to try to sneak in here and get a shot or two. I think the orange is for they're in the breeding season. Oh, he's beautiful. Beautiful. Those orange splotches on it, really nice.
A word of advice for traveling in the desert is to stay on existing roads and trails. Now, this way, we can help preserve this fragile environment for all of us to enjoy.
This kind of place you want. Got some fir trees around.
Right there.
Yep, there we go. I suppose I got to buy the beer since you found the first morel.
Riverbanks like this one are a good place to search for that spring delicacy, oyster mushrooms. Now, wild mushrooms are fast becoming a popular and savory ingredient in a variety of dishes. The key is to know where to look for them and how to identify the tasty ones. Corals, brains, puffballs, morels, mysterious and unidentified white mushrooms, and the ubiquitous generic browns. This is just a modest sampling of the variety of mushrooms found in one small stretch of Idaho woodlands. Of course, the actual spot that these are found is a closely held secret. There's a great view and a dirt road, but these are the only details we're allowed to reveal. You see, mushroom hunters are much like elk hunters, very tight-lipped about their secluded hunting spot. But when they're successful, they tend to flaunt it just a bit.
I've seen puffballs that were half the size of a basketball, weigh 4 or 5 pounds.
Jim Keating has been a fungus fanatic for years and has acquired a good working knowledge of which of these mushrooms are tasty and which ones to avoid. His partner on this venture is Bill Goodnight, and between them, the pair are likely to amass quite a large bucketful to flaunt at less successful hunters.
Well, that's a mother lode there.
Jim's found an area beside the road dotted with the big, rounded white mushroom called a puffball, or anyway mushrooms that look like they may be puffballs.
All right. Now, one of the more dangerous, the most dangerous mushrooms in the woods is an amanita, death caps. And a lot of them will look like this when they look, just like that when they come out of the ground. They get the corrugations and all. And you have to take your puffballs, all of them. Here, get that half. And cut it through. And you see it looks like the inside of a marshmallow. And that is a puffball. Now, if you cut it through there and you could see the embryonic gills and a stem, it'd show like this with the gills. If you could see that, then it's an amanita. This is
Jim emphasizes that you should check every single puffball you pick before adding it to your bucket.
Yeah, it looks like this is one of the mushrooms that's pretty foolproof. You know, we'll bump into some what we call little brown mushrooms out here, and there's a lot of varieties. They're just not to be fooled with.
Jim calls them the ubiquitous browns because they seem to be everywhere in a variety of shapes and sizes. But without extensive chemical testing, it's impossible to tell which are the kind you can cook and which are the kind that will kill. But take heart, there's one brown mushroom that's fairly easy to identify, and is probably the most sought-after fungus in the Idaho woods.
This kind of place you want. Got some fir trees around.
Right there.
Yep, there we go. Yeah.
There's got to be others around here too.
I suppose I got to buy the beer since you found the first morel. Huh?
Jim says that fir trees and morel mushrooms require similar habitat. So avoid the hot, sunny slopes of yellow pine and head for the Douglas fir to begin your search.
Okay, we're into them. We may have to get rid of the camera and start picking before the snow fly. No, I'm kidding.
There's a limit to how many morel mushrooms you can harvest each day before you are considered a commercial picker. So check with the Forest Service before you venture out. And beware of the false morel. They can be poisonous to some people.
Okay, the true morels are attached. The fruiting body itself is attached all the way around the stem. This is the stem here where I cut it off. And the false morels, the stem comes clear up and it's only attached right up here in the top.
Mushrooms are parasites. They need dead material to feed on. This may be why so many seem to appear this summer following a forest fire. But even the wet years yield mushrooms. So if you're lucky enough to get into a mess of morels, Jim says save the big ones for stuffers.
If we're into a lot of mushrooms and we get some big ones, we take and cut the stem out and save it because it's still good. And you can stuff that. And you take and put a little bit of Monterey Jack cheese in there with a little bit of green chilies and dip it in batter and throw it in some frying oil, you know, and or you can put sausage in there or anything. They're outstanding.
Well, if that isn't enough to whet your appetite, try sautéed morels over white-tailed deer steak with puffball mushroom hors d'oeuvres.
Well, if you guys are about ready to eat, we can start cleaning these mushrooms.
Jim says it's best not to wash up the mushrooms until you're about to use them. The morels are the easiest to clean because they aren't found in sandy soil.
We're going to saute these, so we'll just slice them up into little slices.
Morels contain a lot of water, so this big batch will cook down to just enough for 4. Next, the puffballs. They tend to be found along sandy roadsides, so they're a bit harder to clean. Either scrub them with a brush or peel off a layer. Jim likes to fry the big white mushrooms in a little margarine seasoned with salt and pepper.
And I like to cut them fairly thin so they'll crisp up.
The steaks are on, and the whole meal smells heavenly. Jim explains that leftover morels can be either dried like these or stored in the freezer. Either way, they don't lose much flavor, and he adds them to soups, stews, and casseroles all year round. Everything's cooked to perfection, and a wild meal is served.
Well, we have wild Idaho mushrooms and wild Idaho whitetail and wild Minnesota wild rice, yeah, we got some of that, and wild Idaho pickled asparagus.
Hold your rod tip up, like that. Okay, bring him in, bring him in. Okay, now pull in, back up, back up. All right, Michael, another one, yes!
Free Fishing Day. What a great way to kick off the summer. Now, once a year, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game sets a day aside for anyone to try their hand at fishing without purchasing a license. Ponds are stocked with trout, fishing clinics set up, and holes provided. So let the fun begin.
All right. Okay. You want to keep him?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a hot day on Park Center Pond in Boise, but that doesn't seem to bother these young anglers.
How was the fishing today?
I'm fine.
It was good? So we'll come back to
About every half hour, somebody's catching one, and it's been just terrific. The kids are so excited. That's what's so fun about it.
Crawfishes, they're babies, they're
Caught them? Oh,
babies.
but no fish?
No,
No regular trout?
no fish.
No fish, just crawfish?
Yeah.
There's a strange sort of chemistry that occurs when you pair kids with fishing. Somehow each child discovers his or her own way of doing things. Sometimes it can be icky, and sometimes it can be frustrating. Sometimes you hook your neighbor, but then with a little practice, you can get that casting and reeling down to a science. Now, if only the fish could keep up with the kid. Sometimes when Dad's off helping your sister, it's easier to forget the fishing and just eat the bait yourself. And sometimes when you're 2 years old, the best part is touching the fish just to see if they're for real.
What do you think of that, huh?
You gonna toss one in? Okay. Watch it so don't you think?
And if the fishing gets a little slow, you can visit Spot the lizard, one of the animals on display provided by the Watchable Wildlife Program.
Okay, this is a trout.
Or try your hand at identifying some of Idaho's game fish.
Look at these. Look at these. Look how round they are. Do they kind of look like suns? These are called sunfish, and that's why, because their body's round like a sun.
But of course, the best part of fishing is catching fish.
There's nothing there? I don't know. I bet there might be.
I feel something.
What do you feel?
A
Is there a fish on there? Hold your rod tip up. Hold your rod tip up. Yeah. Okay, bring him in, bring him in. Okay, now pull in, back up, back up. All right, Michael, another one, yes. All right, stop right there, buddy. Good job, Michael.
Michael's mom thinks this is a great way to teach kids about fishing.
So it was a lot more festive and a lot easier to get into it. They listen to them easier than they listen to Mom and Dad.
Oh, is this, here, we'll put yours back on here, okay? And both of these can be carried.
No, I don't want hers on mine.
Well, no, we only got one stick,
This is
okay?
mine. I know where another one.
Can Mommy find you another stick?
Mom.
Or did you find one yourself?
Thanks for joining us. We'll close tonight with a look at next month's show, when Incredible Idaho takes you to the roof of the world, where the mountain goat is king.